People think a fortune changes a life. They're wrong. Sometimes a single breath does. The rain had been falling since before sunset, turning the quiet streets of Westchester into rivers of silver beneath the streetlights. By the time I finished scrubbing the marble floors in the Hawthorne estate, my fingers were wrinkled, my back ached, and every muscle in my body begged for sleep. Housekeeping wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to keep the lights on in our tiny apartment and, most importantly, to buy the medication my 3-year-old daughter needed every month. Lily skipped beside me in her yellow raincoat, humming softly while clutching the small blue inhaler that never left her little hand. I reminded her every day that it wasn't a toy. It was the reason she could laugh without coughing, run without stopping, dream without fear. She nodded every time, even if I wasn't sure she understood. Children rarely understood how fragile life could be. I did. Every prescription refill reminded me. Every hospital bill stacked inside my kitchen drawer reminded me. Every second job I accepted reminded me. We reached the bus stop just as the last evening route disappeared around the corner, its taillights fading into the curtain of rain. I sighed, adjusted my backpack, and looked down at Lily. "Looks like we're walking, sweetheart." She smiled anyway. "Rain sounds pretty." I wished I could still hear the world the way she did. We took the shortcut through an older neighborhood lined with towering oak trees and quiet mansions hidden behind iron gates. Most nights the streets were empty. Tonight they felt strangely still, as though the entire neighborhood had forgotten to breathe. Then Lily suddenly stopped walking. "Mommy," she whispered. I turned and saw a dark figure leaning against the stone wall near one of the gates. At first I thought he was simply resting. Then I noticed the way his shoulders struggled with each breath. Even from 20 feet away I could hear the desperate wheeze escaping his chest. He wore an expensive charcoal suit soaked by the rain. One hand pressed against his throat, while the other searched frantically through empty pockets. His face had gone unnaturally pale, and every breath looked harder than the one before it. "Sir," I called cautiously. No answer. Only another strained gasp. Every instinct warned me not to get involved. A woman alone with a child learns to avoid strangers, especially after dark. But another instinct, the one that had carried me through years of hardship, wouldn't let me ignore someone who looked moments away from collapsing. I stepped closer. "Do you have asthma?" His eyes met mine, sharp even through obvious pain, and he gave the smallest nod. "Inhaler," he managed to whisper. My heart sank. I searched around him, beneath the nearby bench, across the wet sidewalk. Nothing. "Mommy," Lily said quietly behind me. I turned just in time to see her tiny fingers wrapping around the blue inhaler she had protected all evening. She looked from the stranger to me with complete certainty, the kind only children possess. "He needs it more." Before I could stop her, she placed her last inhaler into the trembling hand of the man who had become a stranger balanced between one desperate breath and the next. The man stared at the little blue inhaler in his shaking hand as though it was something impossible. His breathing came in short, uneven gasps, and for one terrifying second I wondered if we had been too late. Then he pressed the inhaler to his lips, took one careful dose, paused, and inhaled again exactly the way someone who had lived with asthma for years would. Slowly, painfully, the tightness in his chest began to ease. The desperate panic faded from his eyes, replaced by exhaustion so deep it made him lean heavily against the cold stone wall. Rain continued to fall around us, dripping from the edges of his dark hair and soaking the shoulders of his tailored suit. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. Lily squeezed my hand. "He can breathe now," she whispered with the quiet satisfaction only a child could have. I forced a small smile, but another thought immediately settled in my chest. My daughter no longer had the one thing that kept her safe if another attack came tonight. I knelt beside her and zipped her raincoat all the way to her chin. "We need to get home, sweetheart." The stranger finally found his voice. It was low, calm, and carried an authority that felt strangely natural even after everything that had happened. "Wait." I looked back cautiously. He reached inside his jacket, searching for what I assumed was a wallet, but his hand stopped halfway. He closed his eyes, almost embarrassed by his own weakness. "I need to thank you." I shook my head. "You do not owe us anything. Just promise me you will call someone who can take care of you." His gaze shifted from me to Lily. She stood no taller than his waist, her tiny rain boots splashing in shallow puddles while she smiled at him without the slightest fear. "That was yours," he said softly. Lily nodded. "Mommy says people need help before they need money." His expression changed in a way I could not explain. The hard lines around his face softened for only a heartbeat before returning to the controlled mask he wore so naturally. Somewhere in the distance, headlights cut through the rain. 3 black sport utility vehicles turned onto the quiet street almost at once. They moved with deliberate precision before stopping several yards away. Men in dark coats stepped out quickly, their faces filled not with panic, but with disciplined concern. One of them hurried toward the stranger. "Sir, we have been looking everywhere." The stranger raised one hand, stopping the man before he could say another word. His eyes never left Lily. "Find them tomorrow," he said quietly. "No." He glanced at me again and corrected himself. "Do not follow them tonight." Something about those words sent a chill through me. I did not understand who he was, but I understood enough to know that powerful people rarely traveled with 3 identical vehicles in the middle of a storm. I took Lily's hand. "Come on, sweetheart." She waved cheerfully. "Bye, mister. Do not forget to breathe." The corners of his mouth lifted into the smallest smile I had seen all evening. "I will not." We walked away without looking back, our footsteps disappearing into the steady rhythm of the rain. Neither Lily nor I noticed the man standing silently beneath the streetlight, still holding the tiny blue inhaler in his hand as though it had become the most valuable thing he had ever owned. I barely slept that night. Every few hours I reached over to check Lily's breathing, listening for the familiar whistle that always made my heart stop. The empty space on her nightstand where the inhaler normally rested felt louder than the traffic outside our apartment window. By sunrise, she was still asleep, curled beneath her faded pink blanket with one tiny hand tucked beneath her cheek, and I silently thanked God for giving us one more peaceful morning. I dressed quietly, packed peanut butter sandwiches into her daycare bag, and counted the cash inside my wallet for what felt like the 100th time. After rent, utilities, groceries, and daycare, I had barely enough left to refill her prescription. The pharmacy would not open until 9. My cleaning shift started at 7:30. I would have to figure something out later, just like always. Across the city, the man we had left behind sat alone inside a private medical suite overlooking Manhattan. The oxygen monitor had already been removed, but the little blue inhaler remained on the bedside table. Adrian Moretti had ignored every phone call for the past hour. His physician finished reviewing the examination before closing the chart. "You were lucky," the doctor said calmly. "Another 5 or 10 minutes without medication could have become much more serious." Adrian nodded without answering. His attention never drifted from the inhaler. It looked old, the plastic scratched from years of careful use. A cartoon sticker of a smiling cloud had been placed on one side by tiny fingers. The sticker was peeling at the edges, but someone had obviously tried very hard to keep it from falling off. "This belongs to a child," Adrian said quietly. The physician looked surprised. "Probably." Adrian picked it up carefully, almost afraid to damage it. His thumb brushed across the faded sticker before he asked the question that had been echoing through his mind since the previous night. "Did you find the woman?" One of his security directors stepped forward. "No, sir." Heavy rain disabled several nearby traffic cameras. The neighborhood cameras only captured partial images. "We know she left on foot with a little girl, but they disappeared before reaching the main avenue." Adrian slowly stood and walked toward the window. For years, he had built an organization that could locate almost anyone within hours. Witnesses, business rivals, missing shipments, confidential documents. Nothing stayed hidden for long. Yet somehow the only 2 people he genuinely wanted to find had vanished without leaving more than footprints washed away by the storm. "Keep looking," he said, quietly. "No pressure, no fear. If they help me once, they will not spend another second being afraid because of me." Meanwhile, my morning passed like every other. Vacuum cleaners hummed across polished hallways. Buckets rolled over expensive hardwood floors. Homeowners hurried past me while talking into wireless earbuds, rarely noticing the woman cleaning around them. I preferred it that way. Invisible people heard everything and were remembered by no one. During my lunch break, I checked my phone and found a reminder from the pharmacy that Lily's refill was ready. I smiled with relief, unaware that somewhere only a few miles away, the stranger whose life she had saved was holding her worn little inhaler in both hands, quietly wondering why a child who clearly needed it had chosen to give away the one breath that kept her safe. The pharmacy receipt sat folded inside my apron pocket for the rest of the afternoon, like a tiny victory I had fought far too hard to earn. I had picked up Lily's replacement inhaler during my lunch break, counting every dollar twice before handing over my debit card. When the pharmacist slid the familiar blue device across the counter, I felt the tight knot in my chest finally loosen. I slipped it carefully into my purse, promising myself that this one would never leave her side again. By the time my shift ended, the autumn sun had broken through the clouds for the first time in 2 days, painting the sidewalks with golden light that almost made the city look gentle. I walked the 6 blocks to Lily's daycare with tired legs, but a lighter heart. The moment she saw me through the classroom window, she ran toward the door with the fearless joy only a child could carry. She wrapped her tiny arms around my waist. "Did we get my breathing helper back?" she asked. I smiled and held up the small paper bag. Her bright green eyes sparkled as though I had handed her the greatest treasure in the world. "Thank you, Mommy." She hugged the inhaler before placing it carefully inside her little backpack. Watching her protect it made my throat tighten. She had given away something precious without hesitation because she believed another person needed it more. I hoped she would always keep that kindness, even if the world tried to convince her otherwise. Across town, Adrian sat in the back seat of a black sport utility vehicle that rolled quietly through Manhattan traffic. He had canceled every business meeting scheduled that afternoon, something his staff had never seen him do voluntarily. Instead, he studied a tablet displaying hundreds of security images collected from nearby businesses, traffic intersections, apartment entrances, and bus terminals. Faces appeared one after another before disappearing with a swipe of his finger. None belonged to the woman he remembered. None showed the little girl wearing the bright yellow raincoat. "Anything?" he finally asked. The investigator beside him shook his head. "No clear match yet. Whoever she is, she lives a very ordinary life. No criminal records. No social media trail that fits. She almost disappears into the city." Adrian looked out the tinted window at crowds of people crossing busy intersections. Thousands of strangers hurried past each other every minute. One of them had changed his life forever, yet she blended so completely into the rhythm of the city that she might as well have been invisible. He understood something uncomfortable for the first time in years. Power could buy information. It could not always buy answers. That evening, Lily insisted we stop at the small neighborhood park before going home. She climbed onto the swings while I sat nearby watching the orange sky fade behind the apartment buildings. Her laughter drifted through the cool air, soft and carefree. I did not notice the dark sedan parked quietly across the street. Inside, a single driver observed the playground for only a few moments before speaking into a hands-free radio. "Confirmed," he said calmly. "The child is safe. They do not appear to know they are being watched." A brief silence followed before Adrian's voice answered through the speaker. "Good. Keep it that way. They protected my life without expecting anything in return. Make sure they never lose another peaceful evening because of me." I looked up as a gentle breeze carried fallen leaves across the playground, completely unaware that somewhere nearby, the promise made in the rain had already begun to change all of our lives. The next 2 weeks slipped by with the quiet rhythm that often follows a storm, convincing people that life has returned to normal even when something beneath the surface has already begun to change. Every morning I packed Lily's lunch, checked that her new inhaler was safely tucked inside her backpack, and hurried to whichever house had hired me for the day. Some clients barely looked at me. Others smiled politely before disappearing into meetings, phone calls, and lives that seemed untouched by worries over grocery prices or medical bills. I never envied their wealth. I only envied how easily they seemed to breathe. Lily, on the other hand, had completely forgotten the frightening night in the rain. At least that was what I believed until one afternoon when I picked her up from daycare. She climbed into the back seat of my aging sedan, buckled herself in, and asked, "Do you think the sleepy man is breathing better now?" I caught her eyes in the rearview mirror and smiled. "I hope so." She looked out the window for a long moment before whispering, "Good." I prayed for him. My hands tightened gently around the steering wheel. Children carried kindness so naturally that it often felt like watching something sacred. Across the city, Adrian had become a different man in ways even he did not fully understand. Every report placed on his desk was still read carefully. Every decision was still made with calm precision. But whenever discussions drifted toward profits, acquisitions, or influence, his thoughts wandered back to a little girl who had smiled while giving away the one thing, keeping her own illness under control. The blue inhaler still rested inside a glass display case on the bookshelf in his private office. His senior advisor noticed it during a meeting and hesitated before speaking. That does not seem like something you normally keep. Adrian studied the worn plastic for several seconds. It reminds me that the people with the least sometimes give the most. The advisor remained silent, sensing that no further explanation would come. Later that evening, another investigator entered carrying a thin folder. We found something. Adrian looked up immediately. A cleaning company. One of our traffic analysts traced a partial logo reflected in a store window the night of the storm. The woman may work for Bright Horizon Residential Services. Adrian opened the folder. There was no photograph of Emily, only employee schedules, neighborhood assignments, and addresses for several luxury homes serviced by the company. It was not enough to identify her, but it was the first real thread they had uncovered. He closed the folder gently instead of snapping it shut with impatience. No interviews, he instructed. No questions that make anyone uncomfortable. If she wishes to remain unknown, we respect that. The investigator nodded before leaving. The following Friday, I accepted an unexpected assignment cleaning a newly renovated townhouse in Manhattan after another employee had called in sick. The property manager apologized for the short notice and handed me a temporary access card. The owner is rarely here, she explained. Just finished the guest rooms and the library. I thanked her and stepped inside. The house felt unusually quiet, filled with polished stone, warm walnut shelves, and enormous windows overlooking the city skyline. Everything looked elegant without feeling lived in. I placed my supplies on the floor and began dusting the library, never noticing the small glass display sitting on the opposite wall. Inside rested a familiar blue inhaler with a faded sticker shaped like a smiling cloud, waiting silently for the moment when two separate worlds would finally recognize each other. The scent of lemon polish drifted through the library as I worked my way carefully across rows of dark walnut shelves, dusting framed photographs, crystal sculptures, and leather-bound books that looked too expensive to touch. Houses like this always fascinated me. They were spotless before I arrived, yet someone still paid to make them even cleaner. I moved slowly, making sure every surface reflected the afternoon sunlight pouring through the floor to ceiling windows. That was when something familiar caught the corner of my eye. Resting alone inside a small glass display case was a blue inhaler with a faded sticker shaped like a smiling cloud. My heart skipped so suddenly that I nearly dropped the microfiber cloth in my hand. I stepped closer, staring through the glass. The sticker had a tiny crease near one edge where Lily had accidentally bent it months ago while decorating it with glitter markers. I remembered laughing because she insisted every medicine needed a happy face. There was no doubt. This was hers. My breathing slowed as dozens of questions rushed through my mind. How could it possibly be here? Who would place an old inhaler inside a display case as though it were a priceless artifact? Before I could think any further, footsteps echoed somewhere behind me. Calm, measured, confident. I turned instinctively and froze. The man standing near the doorway looked healthier than the night we met, but I recognized him immediately. The sharp blue eyes, the tailored charcoal suit, the quiet authority that seemed to change the air around him without a single raised voice. He stopped walking the instant our eyes met. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. His gaze shifted past me toward the display case before returning to my face. A faint expression of disbelief crossed his features. "It was you," he said quietly, almost to himself. I tightened my grip on the cleaning cloth. "I am sorry if I touched something I should not have." He slowly shook his head. "No." His voice carried none of the distance it had the first night. "You saved my life." I lowered my eyes, suddenly uncomfortable with the attention. "My daughter did." Silence settled between us again, gentle rather than awkward. Finally, he walked toward the display case and unlocked it with a small key from his pocket. He lifted the inhaler with extraordinary care before turning back to me. "I searched for weeks." I blinked in surprise. "Why?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because people rarely disappear after giving away something this important." I looked at the worn inhaler resting in his hand, and smiled faintly. Lily never thought about losing it. She only saw someone who could not breathe. His expression softened in a way that made him appear far younger than I remembered. Does she know where it is? I shook my head. She thinks someone out there is still breathing because of it. Adrian lowered his eyes toward the tiny sticker before speaking almost in a whisper. She was right. Before I could respond, a cheerful little voice echoed from the front entrance. Mommy. My heart jumped. I had completely forgotten that the property manager said Lily could wait inside after daycare if my assignment ran late. Tiny footsteps hurried down the hallway before Lily appeared carrying her small backpack. She looked at Adrian for less than a second before her entire face lit up with recognition. She pointed at him with complete excitement and laughed. Mommy. The sleepy man found his breath. For a moment, the enormous house felt impossibly small. Adrian looked down as Lily ran toward him without the slightest hesitation, her tiny backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She stopped only a few feet away and smiled the same fearless smile I had seen on that rainy night. You look much better, she said proudly. Adrian lowered himself until he was kneeling at her eye level. It was the first time I had seen someone with such quiet authority make himself look so small simply to meet a child where she stood. I do, he answered gently. Because of you. Lily tilted her head. Did you remember to keep breathing? A soft laugh escaped him before he could stop it. I have tried every day. She nodded with complete satisfaction, as though that settled everything important in the world. I watched the exchange in silence, unable to understand why a stranger who seemed accustomed to commanding entire rooms spoke to my daughter with such patience. Adrian carefully held out the old inhaler. I believe this belongs with its owner. Lily looked at it for a second before slowly shaking her head. No. Both of us stared at her in surprise. Why not? Adrian asked quietly. She pointed toward the glass display case. It helped you. Now it can remind you. Children often said things adults spent years trying to learn. Adrian looked at the inhaler resting in his hands before returning it to the display without another word. His eyes lingered on the smiling cloud sticker as though it carried a lesson money had never been able to buy. After several moments, he turned toward me. Would you allow me to replace every medical expense your daughter will ever have? My heart tightened immediately. That is generous, but we cannot accept that. He did not argue. He simply asked, why? I took a slow breath before answering honestly. Because Lily did not help you expecting something back. If I turn her kindness into a transaction, I teach her the wrong lesson. Adrian studied my face carefully. I expected disappointment. Instead, I saw respect. Real respect. The kind that could not be purchased or demanded. Before he could reply, Lily suddenly coughed. It was only once, then again, sharper this time. My attention shifted instantly. I knelt beside her and opened her backpack, reaching for the new inhaler. Her breathing steadied within moments, but the sound had already changed the atmosphere inside the room. Adrian's expression grew serious. Does that happen often? I hesitated. Less than it used to. He remained silent, waiting. I finally admitted the truth. The night we met, she gave you the last dose from her old inhaler. The pharmacies nearby had already closed. We spent the rest of the night hoping she would not need another one before morning. Adrian did not move. The color slowly drained from his face as he processed every word. You mean? I nodded. If she had another attack before sunrise, I would not have had anything to help her. The library became completely still. Even the grandfather clock seemed louder than before. Adrian lowered his eyes, remembering the desperate relief he had felt after taking that final breath. It had never crossed his mind that every second he survived had been borrowed from a little girl who quietly accepted the possibility of facing the night without the medicine meant to protect her. When he finally looked back at Lily, she was smiling again, completely unaware that she had just placed a weight upon his heart far heavier than any debt he had ever carried. Adrian did not speak again until several minutes after Lily's breathing returned to normal. He stood quietly beside the library window, looking out across the Manhattan skyline as the late afternoon sun reflected from hundreds of glass buildings. From where I stood, he looked like a man carrying a weight no one else could see. Finally, he turned toward us. There are moments, he said softly, when someone spends years believing strength means never owing anyone. Then one act of kindness changes everything. I did not answer because I sensed those words were not meant for me. They were meant for himself. Lily wandered toward the bookshelf, happily counting the colorful bindings without understanding the silence surrounding her. Adrian reached into his jacket pocket and removed a simple white business card. There was no company logo, no title, only his name and a phone number written in dark blue ink. He placed it gently on the nearby table instead of handing it directly to me. If your daughter ever needs anything medically, anything at all, call this number. I looked at the card but made no move to pick it up. I cannot promise that. He nodded with surprising understanding. Then promise me something else. I raised my eyes. Let me earn the right to help instead of forcing it upon you. Before I could respond, an elderly house manager stepped quietly into the library carrying a clipboard. She stopped the moment she noticed Adrian standing beside us. Sir, the foundation board has arrived for tonight's meeting. Adrian glanced toward the hallway before looking back at Lily. Please ask them to wait 10 minutes. The house manager blinked in surprise, but nodded immediately. After she disappeared, Adrian crouched beside Lily once more. Can I ask you a question? She smiled. Okay. Why did you trust a stranger that night? Lily thought very seriously before answering. Because Mommy says scared people need someone brave first. Adrian looked at me. I gave an embarrassed smile. I never meant brave like that. Lily giggled. Mommy is brave all the time. Something shifted inside Adrian then. It was almost invisible, but I saw it. The guarded distance he had carried since we met quietly gave way to something warmer, something that looked remarkably like hope. A week later, my phone rang during lunch while I was folding fresh towels at another cleaning job. I almost ignored the unfamiliar number until curiosity won. Miss Carter, a pleasant woman's voice asked. My name is Rebecca Lawson from the New Horizons Children's Health Foundation. Your daughter was recently nominated for one of our pediatric assistance programs. We would like to cover all asthma-related care, medication, specialist visits, and emergency treatment at no cost to your family. I frowned in confusion. I never submitted an application. Neither did we, Rebecca answered gently. An anonymous donor requested that we review families in need through local pediatric clinics. Your daughter's physician recommended her immediately. I stood completely still, unable to speak. Across the city, Adrian sat at the head of a conference table surrounded by executives discussing charitable initiatives. Charts, financial reports, and proposals covered the polished surface, but none of them knew the real reason the foundation had expanded overnight. Adrian signed the final document before quietly saying, no family should ever have to decide whether they can afford the next breath. No one questioned the statement. They simply watched as he closed the folder and looked out toward the city once again, knowing that somewhere beyond the skyline, a little girl with a smiling cloud on her inhaler had already begun changing far more lives than her own. 6 months passed more quickly than I thought possible. Life did not suddenly become perfect, but it became lighter in quiet ways that mattered. Lily no longer missed medical appointments because I could not afford them. I no longer stayed awake at night wondering whether I should pay for groceries first or prescription refills. The foundation never made us feel like charity. Every nurse welcomed Lily by name. Every specialist treated her like a little girl instead of another patient on a schedule. I never asked who the anonymous donor was because deep inside I already knew. Some answers did not need to be spoken aloud. Adrian never tried to buy his way into our lives. He kept the promise he had made in the library. He earned every small step. Sometimes he would stop by the community park on Saturday mornings carrying fresh bagels from a neighborhood bakery. Sometimes he would bring children's books because Lily loved bedtime stories. Other weekends he simply sat on a nearby bench while Lily chased squirrels across the grass, smiling more than talking. There was something peaceful about watching a man who carried so much responsibility forget the rest of the world because a little girl wanted him to admire a colorful leaf or a funny-shaped cloud. One crisp autumn afternoon, Lily climbed onto the bench beside Adrian and reached into her tiny backpack. I have something for you, she announced proudly. She pulled out a brand new blue inhaler still sealed inside its pharmacy box. Adrian looked at it in confusion. Sweetheart, this belongs to you. She nodded. I already have mine. Then she carefully placed the unopened box into his hands. Now you can keep this one forever, and nobody has to share anymore. Adrian stared at the little package for several seconds before his eyes slowly lifted toward me. I could see gratitude there, but also something deeper. Relief. Healing. The quiet understanding that this gift was never about medicine. It was about freedom from the memory of that rainy night. He accepted it gently, almost reverently. "Thank you," he whispered. Lily leaned against his shoulder with complete trust. "You are welcome." I watched them together, realizing that neither of them had rescued only the other. Adrian had helped give my daughter the healthy future I had prayed for every single night. Lily had given him something no amount of success or influence had ever managed to provide. She reminded him that compassion could exist without conditions. That kindness did not calculate value before it acted. As the sun began to set, painting the park in warm shades of gold and amber, Adrian stood beside us and looked across the playground where families laughed together beneath the falling leaves. "I used to believe people became strong by holding tightly to everything they had," he said quietly. "Your daughter taught me that real strength begins the moment you are willing to give something away for someone else." I reached for Lily's small hand as we started walking home together. She skipped happily between us, talking about birds, school, and what flavor ice cream she wanted after dinner, completely unaware that the simplest decision of her young life had forever changed 3 hearts. Even now, whenever I hear someone take a deep, peaceful breath, I remember that rainy night and the little girl who believed another person's next breath mattered just as much as her own. Because sometimes the strongest soul in the room belongs to the smallest person, and the greatest miracles begin with an act of kindness that expects nothing in return.